this computer, so it is recording. So g'day guys, welcome to session 2, I suppose, in this series that I'm covering called Prehab, just really using the kettlebells and showcasing how we can utilize that kettlebell for all levels of clients and obviously for athletes that come into our space. So last week, if you guys did watch the recording, we used the concept of the swing, and in particular looking at a couple of variations with load and gravity and external force. So we looked at how we can get good spinal health with the swing if it's taught properly. And in particular, we looked at those two types of vector forces, and vector forces really expand into 6 to 8 really in the three-dimensional plane. But simply put, we looked at the horizontal vector force. That's more of a shearing force on the spine. So what we ascertained there was that, you know, when I'm starting to come into any type of hinge at this angle here and I'm swinging, there's a shear force that's happening on the spine, as opposed to if I'm pressing or if I'm coming up from a squat movement, arguably there's a lot more compressive forces, especially if I'm loading above the head. So you've got those two types of forces that interplay with the discs of the spine. So really what's important here, guys, in this, I suppose, little mini series, and it's an extension, every week I'll focus on one key movement. This is the swing, and I'll show you guys some key variations. And look, guys, with all of this, it's a body of knowledge. So some of you would have learnt some of this. Some of you needed to be reminded of this. For others, it would be quite enlightening. So the best way to learn something, guys, is to do it. And there's a saying, you learn things twice. You learn things in the context of when someone teaches you, and you learn it again when you teach it. So really, it's important to understand that if there's no context of you being able to teach it to yourself or your clients, then it's really hard to get a type of practical grasp. There's probably an intellectual grasp, and we're going, yep, you know, I kind of know it and it makes sense, but we need not the intellectual, we need the experiential grasp. So you've got the intellectual versus the experiential. So I really want you guys to transfer that. Now, the other thing I do want to segue in is that it kind of, what Ramsey mentioned was about some clients going to have errors in movement, right? Let's just say in the swing, we could draw out a multitude of different errors of movement depending on their skill level. Last week, I talked about the whole hierarchical level toward mastery, but mastery never stops, you know, like, you know, Pele, the great soccer player, said he never stopped learning. Bruce Lee, you see all the greats who said, I never stopped learning, never stopped learning. It's interesting, right? We kind of think of that pinnacle. So the idea is that we can get to a level of mastery with anything we do, but we want to make sure that we keep refining that and refining it. So it's almost like you're going to get a client, and in this case, maybe what Ramsey was alluding to, the client may be in an unconscious, incompetent level. And so when we're trying to transfer knowledge to them, we need to draw from our coach's buckets, if you will. We've got different buckets. What's going to be appropriate to them according to ordinarily the VAC, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So we can affect movement significantly through auditory, and in particular, there's verbal and non-verbal cues. If we look at the auditory or verbal, we really have two types of ways that we cue: internal, external. Now, a lot of research and studies been circulating, and in particular, Nick Winkelman, who's awesome. I'm going to have him on the Tribe on Thursday night, so don't miss that out if you're in the VIP group. He talks a lot about skill acquisition and skill retention, and as it relates to the research done on external cueing. So I'm not going to focus so much on that, but what I did want to say is that when we bring all of this together, the way that we coach and communicate, it's going to impact the client's level of skill, or their ability to acquire skill, and then retain that. So acquiring a skill may be a short term of something, and then a longer term acquisition of skill is the way that you coach and break down that movement, i.e. the deliberate practice of something. So when we take the swing, for example, we want to take this concept of deliberate practice that Anders Ericsson talks about, and look at how in each of those phases, we can get our client competent in those different phases, so that ultimately, when they piece all of that together, They achieve a degree of mastery. Now, the beautiful thing about the swing is that, you know, we can take all of the buckets, if you will, of the coaching skills, so be it visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, to actually ensure that there's a safe and efficient way to do the swing. So when I talk about prehab, that element is how do we safely and efficiently perform a given task, okay? So combined, I term this prehab, right? So the idea is that we want to prevent injury from happening, number one, and that we want the clients to also acquire new levels of skill and awareness, okay? Awareness of the movement. So rather than us telling the client every time, this is what you do, this is what you do, okay? Ultimately, we come to a level where they become competent, unconscious and competent, right? And then you achieve a degree of mastery. And then beyond that, we want to then layer in a new level of skill. And so what I want to cover today is a bit of a recap from last week, and then move into the one-arm swing and show you guys a few, for want of a better term, biomechanical hacks that will ensure safety and efficiency using mainly kinesthetic-based cues. So that's more of a non-verbal. My point earlier was that later on, I'll start to layer in more verbal instructions based on external cueing. So all of this will tie back in and make tremendous sense if you continue to follow the series, but I wanted to kind of give a lot of context to the idea of coaching as being something that is personalized and something that may not work for one client as opposed to another. So if we take Ramsey's example, you know, typically if we don't coach the movement properly, the clients will fall into a number of errors in movement. So all right. So the idea is that whenever we're getting a client to even swing a bell, are they posturally in a good position? Because if they're, for example, too much anterior tilt, then guess what? You're gonna have to do the job on restoring that function, that tightness, rebalancing between the anatomy, so the anterior and posterior. Now, if they're too posteriorly tilted, then you're gonna have maybe potential sway back, or they're already in a bad position. You see what I'm saying? So we need to first and foremost have a look at their posture, have a look at their alignment. Because if you see that they're predisposed here, that they're really tight, and then you're loading them up, you're loading them with more dysfunction, right? So the idea is that we want to do a few primers. Now, a couple of things that I will do, and this is kind of tying in from last week too, is there's a nice little technique that I've been employing, and it's actually tackling the TFL first. So again, if we want to prime specifically for the kettlebell, what I want to do as a form of preparation is start to target maybe the tight hip flexors and those contributing muscles and fascia that may inhibit the ability to extend, right? Because what will happen is there may be an exaggeration of that extension that leads into a hyperextension because there's no awareness or control of the lumbar. So that's another thing I will say is getting that lumbopelvic rhythm and control to mitigate the risk of hyperextension or lack of extension for that matter. So the very first thing is if you guys want to follow along, I'll just show you guys a couple of things that I'll do to prime for clients. So number one is, I'll show you guys from a different angle here, is that I'm going to lay on the foam roller and then at a 45-degree angle tilt. And all I'm going to do is extend this arm, see the toes, extend the toes, and then I'm just going to lay into it, open up through that TFL. And so I'll start to just undulate through that space. And this one here will start to make a world of difference. And then I'll start to work up and lower into that quad line, focusing more on that TFL and extending out and then getting the fascia and tissue and start playing around with that position. And it's pretty gentle. It's really, the thing I like about this, it's really gentle. They're not gonna injure themselves, and it's fairly unloaded, okay, really important. So here, so I'm not going side on, I'm coming front and then tilting, rest the head, here, extend, and the toes, I'm lengthening through that fascia, and then just resting and pivoting through. And it's all these subtleties with foam rolling that make the difference. So in this case, I'm actively releasing that TFL. Now you may need to just teach your clients how to find that. So the greater trochanter, okay? And then the ASIS, it's often in the middle, those two junctions. And then just rest right on that bony part. So that's one thing I'll do. Now, the next thing specific is I want to work in through the hips. So here's where I'll come into a key position of flex and then extend, contract the glutes so I have a bit of a active PNF and hold, press, so I'm activating the hip flexors and then I'm going to release. So I want to get that idea, and then I want to control the lumbar here, you see? So if they're doing this, and they've got no awareness, guess what? When they start to swing a bell, they're most likely going to jut into this default position. So from here, what I further can do is I can come into a banded position here. Bring it right up. So that's going to pull me here. And so I'll add a little bit more activation. Pull, squeeze, squeeze, hold. I may then further to that, just put a dowel rod to actually get that kinesthetic awareness of, hey, this is the terminal position, right? Because if I do this, I'm going to start to jar those discs, lower discs. So I'll let it pull me back, come in, squeeze, keep in this symmetrical position. And I might do this for about 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Reset. 1, 2. Now, if I want more, I could come forward or get a stronger band. But this is all about a bit of a subtle activation. 1, 2, 3. Or if I want to load this position, I'll lift off the heel and come more into a loaded position. Okay? So, my point there is there's ways that we can, even before, yeah, if you wanted to practice, it's good, Phil. We can start to simplify the client's positioning. So if I try to do the same standing, right, and I simply went here, this is okay, right? But it doesn't mean it's going to potentially eliminate that problem of this. It's what Ramsey said before, right? But however, if I do it from a kneeling position, then I'm just focusing on those hips. See, not knees, ankles, focusing purely on those hips. Now, suppose now that they're ready to transfer into more of a typical position that I'd be adopting when I'm swinging. So I'm going to be standing here, and then again, I might be priming for that swing. So I talked a lot about that last week, where even just without the bell is to have that tactile feedback, this thing here. And then what I do is then I load them with the kettlebell with that pull. So it's, as long as they're not being pulled into dysfunction, right? So if I'm fighting too much against this, then the band is too strong or I've stepped too far forward. So you've got to really understand where your client's at with that. And what I'd suggest is use really light tubing. This would be pretty even advanced. Like this is enough for me if I'm going to warm up for my swings, and I've been doing it for a long time. So here. Now, remember last week, I talked less about giving you guys a breakdown of the swing, but looking at some common problems that do occur. So here, I get that pull. Now, again, I could tell you guys about the multitude of benefits, but you need to experience that yourself. So the first thing is by including a mobilization and activation specific for the movement, I've got the client aware, right? Maybe I'll do a bit of testing to see how that TFL is, but in either case, you've got to understand, meet your clients where they're at. They may just have tight hip flexors from sitting around too much. So they're always going to try to exaggerate that extension, potentially. That's why that little bit of tubing, and you guys could also help your client by pulling against the hips, allows them to feel what it's like to fight against that, right? And further to that, I will use sometimes the dowel rod that I showed you to keep those 3 points of contact, okay? So the dowel rod placed here, and then just get them to move through it so that they're not going to, if they come here, they've lost the contact. And again, it's that idea of awareness and feedback. So I'd ask the client, okay, when you come up, feeling any pain? No? Okay, I want you to slowly, again, being aware of that stick, making contact. It's all about in building that bit of awareness with feedback. Because if you're not giving that feedback, then you're giving feed forward and feedback loops that they're able then to cognize so that it becomes a skill awareness, an acquisition of that particular skill, then to move into something else. So I wanted to kind of almost replay a little last week, but go a bit deeper and give you guys a couple of ways to specifically and meaningfully and purposefully warm up or prepare your client. It's not a general warm up. This is the thing. It's not a general thing to get the swing or some of those movements. It's specific. And so this is really what I'm harping on about here is be specific whenever you're warming up. Your warm up is part of your program. It's not something that is a filler. Similarly, your recovery, okay? So you need to spend multiple sets doing the foam rolling specific to eliminate those imposters, right? You're gonna have a lot of typical things that occur. Now, in a one-on-one case, you can be a little bit more didactic and a bit more analytical. In a group scenario, you can generally use some of these that you know will allow the client to move more efficiently, okay? Coupled with looking at what is this safe outcome for them, right? Safety and efficiency combined allows them to then potentially move on to that next skill component. So only when they're moving through that swing and you're seeing no shearing or full extension, and what we want to then do is make sure that that spine, when it comes into flexion extension, never falters. So they're always coming back to neutral. Okay, back to neutral, not here or here. And just getting comfortable with whatever angle that they're at, right? So that shearing force that we talked about is part of our horizontal vector force, which is healthy, which is shown by Stuart McGill to add more healthiness and allow the spine to have greater ability to transfer force, okay? The lumbar has to be stable, and if it's not stable, that's where we're gonna get angry discs, grumpy discs, okay, that occur. So you wanna obviously at all costs try to mitigate the risk of that by proper preparation and utilizing the bands for that feedback. Nothing better than using bands appropriately to get the feedback. Now, another one that I will show you is if I want to adjust a couple of things, and that includes the bell drop. That's one of the errors that occurs, and I'll show you what that looks like. You might typically see this, so clients will come into the swing and they'll lose that contact. So this is something that you want to avoid a lot. So if, again, a lot of group stuff that's happening, I'll do a couple of things. Okay, a couple of things that will really help to prevent the bell drop. Now, just if you guys are very well educated, so what happens when that bell moves away from the center of mass and I lose that connection? Okay, you probably got the answer. I start to load the lumbar disc more, and I put it into a compromised state. So I want to keep that bell really close to the center of mass. I want it to be an extension of me, yeah? So the bell is an extension. Here. So a couple of things. One I can do is take a light mini band and place this, for now, you need to place it about halfway along that femur, yeah? Sorry, at the tibia, about halfway along that shin, okay, from the knee, okay, all the way to the ankle, about halfway. And so what I'm doing here is I'm getting extra activation, number one. So obviously that band trying to pull me in this way, activation. And then what I'm doing is here, as I'm holding that position, I'm going to get definite feedback if I hit that too low. It's pretty safe, yeah? So here. Okay, so that's another great way to avoid that common error from happening as well, is that bell drop. Now, suppose now another thing we can do is that we want to avoid, that's good, Guillermo. So try that one in your own time. The other one is that I'd use is, just going to pop out a screen a second. And again, come back up. And then use something that will allow me to give definite feedback if I drop. The only thing there is that they'd have to come back and collect it again. But just the mere fact of knowing that that's there draws awareness. So it actually gets the client more focused on that swing now, you see? And it's so easy to lose focus. And so one of the things that we use in our coaching communication is getting the clients to focus on something. So when they've got the pull of that band on those hips, they're focusing on that pull, okay, that they're fighting against. And so they're going to be less distracted. So when I'm adding in these props, we've got to do it in such a way that there's a clear outcome, an objective. That's really the modus operandi here when it comes to this. Otherwise, you know, it looks fancy. It has to have an ultimate objective, because only then, when we get the clients to fully focus, they're less likely to get injured. Now, in the gym environment, they may get real distracted. And if they're looking away, guess what? Where the eyes go, the body follows. So the other thing that I will start to do is a lot of eye training, gaze stabilization. So here's what I'll do here is, start to teach this a lot now. I'll get a couple of spots in the gym, right? Let's just say here I have the kettlebell just in front of me here. Okay, so just ahead of me, just there, I'm going to get my focus on this point up here, right? So there's a point here, the focus, and then here. So as I'm moving through this is the horizon, right? Here to there. So that way, I've got less risk of flexion extension, which the neck is an extension of the whole of the spine. It's not separate. So here, I've got even greater focus. Here. Now, that's one bit of feedback. If I start to add bands and I start to add verbal, so a combination of verbal, non-verbal, too much feedback loop, too many feedback loops going on for your clients, feed forward, feedback. So training the eyes as well in the swing is going to help the client, A, to be focused, and B, not to hyperextend and have the eyes wandering. So you're going to do a little bit of what's called gaze, G-A-Z-E, stabilization, to help clients with that focus so that the neck remains in neutral position throughout that whole of that swing. And that's the key, guys, with the swing, for that healthiness of the spine includes that neck. So if they got their head up, compression, upper traps, couple that up, compression and pain at the same time. So taken together, the healthiness of the spine, you need to look at the whole thing from the feet all the way up the chain. Last week I did talk about the feet into the ground as well. Now I love to train barefoot and really encouraging you guys and your clients to press that foot into the ground, make contact. Now when we do that, I talked last week about gravity, right? And then you couple that loaded direction with ground force is the opposite direction. That allows us to create stability, okay? And through the whole foot into the ground, right? So I'm not talking like this, I'm talking like intentional. Here, rip the ground, here. Now when I go up to swing, I'm active. Okay, so all the way from the ground, my whole kinetic chain is active, and then I can move through whatever I'm teaching the client at their phase or their skill development. So really, you're teaching the client from the ground up. You're not just simply going, here's a hinge, here's half swing, here's full swing, and here are all of the variations that we can go into. You're teaching the clients key skills that relate to a feeling or an awareness of what is activating, in a sense, what is stabilizing. And then taken together through this dynamic movement we call the swing. And that's why I call it the power of the swing, because if we think of just an outcome, the swing is good for me, well, what is it good for me specifically for? Then we can know, we can start to customize the movement specific to a client or a group of clients as well. And the beauty of this, guys, is that, you know, we can do our blocks, our 6-week blocks, our, you know, in group scenarios or in one-on-one, and we can start to phase in different levels of skills, right? So now what I'll take you to is this. Can you please show how to do the upper body part of the swing? The upper arms on contact with the body, whereas many people have straight, yeah. That was a question last week. So some of you have seen my technique. And what part of my reason is this, right? So if my arms are out here, right? So if we think about this, then I have a further distance from the center of mass, right? So just understand this is not wrong. But if I start, and I'm especially a beginner, and now that may be too much of a distance, so I'm losing potential control with those arms that are straight. Whereas I can be more active in that posterior by slightly pulling back and actually at the same time locking those elbows in. So that way it becomes more efficient and safe, but it's not to say that that's wrong later on. If you're happy here, whereas what I've learned is keeping it here really allows me to be safe and efficient and get more out of the swing. And I can, you know, so it's, from that perspective for beginners, it's just closer, that trajectory isn't as farther away, a bit closer to the body. And that's why I draw the elbows in a little bit. Of course, we don't want them flaring, so it becomes very sagittal. So last week I talked about sagittal, and then we're going to start to be multiplanar with the swing. Now, when we go from two hands, so guys, I've given you quite a lot there to mull over, to experiment. Remember, it's experiential. At the moment, a lot of you aren't trialing this yet, but it's very intellectual. I want it to be experiential. That's the whole body and the mind working together. So the one arm swing, and guys, as many questions as you want, you can lump them in the chat, by the way, and we can ask. I'll open up a chat at the end if you guys have curiosities. So now we're going to move into the one arm swing, and there's a couple of things that I'll show you that may not be self-evident when you first see. Now, if a client as well with our shoulder, right? So again, keeping this prehab idea is that next week I'll get more into an overhead position. Now, if I'm here and I'm internally rotating in this position and the shoulder is grumpy, then I'm actually creating less space in that shoulder, right? So here, if I want to open up the shoulder, the whole head of the humerus, then what I want to do is keep this, perhaps this neutral position. So what I'm getting at here is when we're doing a one arm swing, often what we teach is we want as much rotation as possible. So it's almost like this, and I'll show you an example. So there's a winding up here. There's a bit of a winding up of the tissue, yeah? So that's really good for fascia. If I want to go here and pull in, right, it allows me to become more elastic, more powerful. But if the client has a bit of a grumpy shoulder, and again, the one arm swing is more intermediate, guys. I'll stress that again. The one arm swing is more of intermediate to advanced, because now we're taking this 16 kilo bell from a two-hand sagittal and doing it on a one arm swing, which really doubles the load. So I need to make sure that I have an awareness of not rotating against that force, right? So that's not being pulled here if I'm swinging in this direction. So this free arm is really important. As it is if we're jogging or sprinting, the arms are allowing us to stabilize, allowing us to use those sling systems effectively to stabilize through that pelvis and to produce counter movements. So the counter movement in the one arm swing is really important. And it ensures that we don't over rotate in the lumbar. Okay, so the big thing here with the one arm swing is you need to make sure the clients are swinging beautifully with two hand. You've built a lot of volume in before you include the one arm. So from a safe progression perspective, you really need to really qualify them, okay? Earn the right. And so we go up to the skill pyramid, like I said at the beginning, two-hand swing. Okay, excellent. They're doing multiple sets. They're not failing. Every repetition is as good as the previous one. You don't want to get to a swing where they're going like this. Okay, guys, bust a few more out. It's not like trying to grind and run up a mountain. Like, it might be ugly that last 20 meters, but with the swing, you don't want to get ugly in those last few reps because you're wanting to get that volume out. So that's a point I will make. So that brings me back to this whole skill thing again. Now we're taking that movement now and adding more complexity and more load as well. And so the one arm swing, a couple of things here, is that it's not just sagittal now, it's transverse, more transverse. So I'm actually rotating a little bit into the transverse. So it becomes more three-dimensional now. So I'm coming out of this corridor, and now when I'm coming through the corridor, I'm slightly opening up. That's kind of where I want to be ending up. So if I've got the bell here, look at the position of the shoulder, square, here, arm, neck position. And you can see here, if this arm isn't functioning, counterbalancing, and also I haven't trained the neck and the eyes in the gaze stabilization, where the eyes go, the body follows. And you're going to see potentially a lot of this, or even more subtle than that, okay, over time. Even knees coming in, okay? That's why I really focused a lot on the beginning of those components and focusing so methodically on that two-hand swing. I mean, arguably, you don't even, in some instances, you won't even give your clients the load yet. Take them on the band. Just get them doing a few of the hip movements with the band pull. The load will come later, right? And again, us as coaches, we think inside, we go, well, the client needs to start swinging with the bell. That's only a limited mindset. We need to instill this journey, this idea of a journey with our clients. Okay, got enough on a tangent there. So let me go back to that one arm swing. Let me show you a few. Yep, no problem, Jackie. I think I'm going off here. What's the time now? All right, I'll be trying to be done by 2:30. I always love these sessions. So let me just, from here. So I'm going to start in this position again. Maybe from this hand. Now this hand is going to cut the ground away. Yeah, cut. So I'm going to start from here. I'm already now elastic. I'm winding up that tissue. So 45 degrees, and Ramsey made a good point earlier. He said, here, when I'm coming back, I want to almost use that elastic, that pull. And that's why the band mimics that concept of that elastic effect. Pulling, and I want to, and later on, that's where I'm going to start to derive a lot more power in my swings, is by accentuating that drop of that bell and coming up powerfully. So if the weight is too much, remember that that's where we may see hyperextension, or we may see a struggle to actually manage and have that. So for example, we may see a fight to try to get that bell up. So if this starts to get too heavy, I may see this happening. And this, every time, pulling that shoulder uncomfortably. So one quick thing I can do here is keep the hand in neutral position, or the arm. So I'm not rotating now. So it becomes less rotation, because I'm not here, I'm not feeding this rotation here. If I'm here, I'm feeding rotation. If I'm here, not feeding it as much. So, neutral. So that's an option that can help if, even for you guys, you have a client who's intermediate, more advanced, and their shoulder is a little grumpy, that will keep it in neutral. Just avoid that internal rotation taking place. And so one of the things I'll do there is feed that. And just let it reach. So here I'm opening up through all of the teres major, the lats, stretching through, and just feeling that shoulder in internal and external rotation. And I want to feed a lot more external, so I'll go deeper and deeper. So part of your movement prep now will be mobilizing the tissue in the upper body as well. Internal, external. And so you're feeding that whole of the kinetic chain in the preparation, especially if you're doing one arm swings. I'd recommend now to add in your mobilizations. Maybe this is a bit too thick, but the idea is here, let it feed. So teres major, lats are being stretched. Open up. It's like a light bulb. It's like I'm screwing in and releasing. So now I'm mobilizing necessarily the upper body as well, because that's all linked. In a two-hand, you can prime it, but it's not as relevant. You see now I'm being even more specific in how I'd warm up and prepare for a one-arm swing, if I'm including that. I'd also mobilize the trunk, pardon me, mobilize the trunk in rotation. It's going to be that bit of rotation required. Like I said last week, at least 40 degrees of rotation in that thoracic, right? Otherwise, we're going to be borrowing, guess from who? So if I'm lacking rotation here, okay, it looks like I'm mobile, but I'm not. I'm over-rotating here, right? So about 45 degrees, keep square. So I'd start to mobilize into the transverse plane as well. So guys, some food for thought there. You know, taken together, the progression of a swing isn't as simple as it seems. I will say that. However, we can mitigate the risk of injury by safely progressing clients in a way that includes tactile feedback, in a way that's specific for them, in a way that's deliberate. We strip back and meeting them where they're at. And just being patient with that process and getting continual feedback, allowing the client to actually own it and feel it before jumping on to the next progression, okay? Now, I've got tons of different progressions for the swing, and it's really nice that we can do that, but only once we've got this firm foundation, because you want longevity. Think, at the end of the day, you want to be, you know, swinging the bell, what if that's what you're going to teach for many years, right? Like, that's going to be potential staple for your clients' sort of movement diet. So guys, again, if you can take last week plus this week and apply it next week with your clients or yourself first. Next week, we're going to focus a lot more on some progressions, safe progressions with a swing, but I want to start getting into overhead positions. So I want to start exploring a lot on the Turkish get up as well, because that is another great way to help with this prehab concept and help with stacking. And now we're going to talk about more compressive load, but in a real three-dimensional plane. And that's the beautiful thing about the Turkish get up. It's not linear or sagittal, but however, I will show you guys how to break it down, because it's a high neural demand movement. You've got 8 steps in the traditional get up. So what I want to do is take those eight steps, strip them down, give you the why for each, and then give you guys some exercises, if you will, that are fun. Like I want this to be engaging and interesting for your clients. So if it's not interesting, then they're going to get bloody bored. So every time when we coach, the way we communicate feedback, it makes it interesting for them. Be interested, and they will be interested in you as well. And so a lot of this coaching stuff we're doing, guys, is about us being continually interested by adding in not just stuff that's groovy or looking like, you know, like it's amazing. It's like, hey guys, did you actually see if you did it this way, and it could be a slight little adjustment in the way that you verbally or non-verbally added a cue, then they'll go, oh yes, this felt a ton better. Bang, a light bulb goes off and they're hungry. All of a sudden you've got the dopamine and they're wanting more and more. So taken together, you know, try not to be too mechanical, right? You can be methodical, but try not to be too mechanical. Let it kind of flow into a methodical method. So I'm a big believer in that, but try not to be too mechanical, you know, like, hey, every client, you need to go through this. You can have a bit of a plan, but what happens, you know, when someone walks into your gym and they're a bit injured, your plan kind of goes out, doesn't it, a bit? So you need to be really adaptive as a coach and have all of these numerous methods, these tactics that allow you to tackle some tricky scenarios at times, but allows you to have a clear progressive pathway for your clients, wherever they're at in their skill. You'll have some clients who are going to be further up that rung in their skill. So don't assume that all your clients are going to be like the same. Even the hinge as a movement pattern is a very complex thing for a lot of clients, because they're stuck in maybe a hunch position. Maybe they've never played many sports, so they don't have maybe a movement background. Maybe they're just really tight. Maybe they've had an injury. So you got to consider all of these things in due light of how you teach the swing, both from a safe and efficient perspective. When we bring those two together, we can take our clients on a movement journey that goes into mastery, loops back, and then we can feed them into a new movement practice. Would be it a one-arm swing. There's alternating swings, which is a coordination factor now. And then further to that, we have gait-based swings where we're moving either in a compass style, step-based, forward-based, side-based. And so we have all of these different variations and progressions that we can take our client on with the swing itself. all attached to their end goal, of course, okay? So guys, if you want to open up for any questions, I've got a few minutes, so I usually keep at least an hour for this presentation. So please, hopefully that clarified something for you, Ramsey, from your first question. You guys are more than happy to ask some questions if you've had any, for those who have been on. So really appreciate each of you giving up your hour for a good purpose. If not, guys, I'll have the recording for this. And it's like anything, you know, the only way we can get confidence is if we practice something deliberately, right? And so when we do that, we're going to get more competence, and we have this loop of competence, confidence. So that's what I would say about it. If you're not feeling so confident with the swing yourself, well, go back to these, really strip it right back so that you're getting that requisite competence. And what I feel is fascinating, yeah? I mean, the idea of coaching, the idea of teaching is to draw the client into a level of mastery, but also interest and intrigue as well. And so I hope you can take a leaf out of the coaching stuff that I've provided. And I focused a lot more on the kinesthetic as opposed to the verbal, although there's a ton of great verbal cues that I could provide you. And I will at some point. There's just so much we can pack in an hour. So Ruth's never done the swing before, is that right? In bare feet. Yeah, bare feet. Now, the other thing that I do, guys, I get a trigger ball to wake up the fascia, okay? So on the foot. Now, when I do that on the foot, I energize, because remember, it's all skin-based receptors. Now, when you take the shoes off, it's going to be feeling a bit strange because your feet have been trapped for so long. But when you start to splay the feet and you start to get a trigger ball, even just lightly, you actually activate that fascia, because all the main fascial lines sit underneath that foot. That's my other foot, by the way. Sit underneath the foot. And so what I want to do is I want to activate that fascia. And that helps a lot, whether you're squatting or whether you're swinging. That's another tip as well. So it's a good question there, Ruth, is to wake up the fascial lines, the superficial front line, back line, spiral lines, lateral lines, all feed underneath that foot. Any other questions I had? Can you please, okay, Jackie had to go. Well, it's kind of good. At least I'm hoping that I addressed some of those sort of curiosities that you guys have had. Now, I want you guys to walk away. If you haven't done much on the swing, try barefoot, okay? Give it a go. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I've been doing barefoot training for a long time, but I respect if I go into a commercial gym, I'll put shoes on, and it just feels so much different. So maybe get some minimalist shoes, that will help. You know, of course, if I go running, I don't go barefoot, but just it's all relative to how strong your foot is. Obviously, the more you go barefoot, you need to just be careful of not being abrupt. It's like going into one extreme to another. So maybe you might go minimalist first and then maybe barefoot. It just might be too sensitive from the beginning. So that's my side of caution in that regard. And of course now, you know, I've got the whole synthetic grass, so that kind of allows a bit more of a softer impact. If I'm going to be doing a lot of jumping, you got to be careful of barefoot as well. Like if you haven't trained up those tendons and the ballistic power, I wouldn't jump around too much. Doing a swing is fine because it's low impact on your joints. You're not jumping around necessarily, right? Your feet are stationed into the ground. They're contacting the ground all the time unless I'm moving in to different aspects such as the compass swing, the side swing. That's when I can start to lose that contact. Okay, but good questions. All right, guys, really awesome having you guys on, and Ramsey, good to finally see you, meet you virtually. Hopefully see more of you, Ruth, Phil, Melissa, John, and Guillermo. So now, from now, next session, I hope to see you guys. I'll kind of move away a bit from the swing and get more into the overhead positions with the get up. And honestly, the get up used for any client, like anyone, any client that walks in your gym. It's an incredible strength and conditioning movement that allows us, as you'll find out, to have a nice stable position overhead, but actually allow us to focus. It really adds a lot of vestibular, visual, balance training as well. So I'm looking forward to getting into that next week. So next week, if you've got a kettlebell, if you've got like a yoga block, I'm a big fan of those, you get that, some bands, and I'll show you guys some good kinesthetic based stuff with using the bands as well. If you've got a wrist issue, we'll work around anything you have, guys. Of course, if it's a high risk injury, I can't, but if there's any limitations, let me know. But we're going to be active next week. So we don't necessarily need a kettlebell, by the way. If you've just got a yoga block, a bottle of water, something like that, we're going to be doing a fair bit of movement next week. So I hope to see you guys next week. All the best, guys, for the rest of the week. I hope you guys keep going strong and focused wherever you are. I look forward to some of your feedback. And any questions that you may have kind of just not thought of and it arises, please bring that next week. But I want to see some success. So this week, try it if you're confident with your clients, so long as you're not being too extreme, okay? Just you remember you learn things twice, okay? All right, guys, take care. See ya.